All right, second day, nobody's here. That's good. Everybody's asleep. They're going to miss the cats. We're going to have a little fun. Startup here, startup meow. I've always dreamed of making a presentation with just cats. My dream and yours will come true today. So put on your seatbelts, here we go. And all of this is designed for my campaign, viral campaign, SlideShare of the Year. So I hope you tweet and like it lots. I'll share the slides after the presentation. All right, so a little bit about my background. Innovation Nest is actually the first accelerator that I became a mentor of a few years ago, which is Polish, for those of you that don't know. And I'm involved with a number of accelerators, 500 startups, as well as a number in Europe. I run a company called Keen. It's a print marketplace in the US. We have offices in San Mateo, California, and in Kiev, Ukraine. So I'm in Kiev lots. And with my partners who are all here, and you'll hear more about CCC later today. I'll tell you more about that. We're creating an organization that fosters entrepreneurship in Central, Eastern Europe, and Middle East. And we'll be putting on a number of different events, including coming back to Poland in April of next year. So you'll hear lots about that throughout the day. All right, so there are two types of cats. There are corporate cats, and there are startup cats. And when you're a young kitten, and you're choosing your career path in the world, you have to know kind of what you're getting into, right? Startups are very fashionable, very fun, very interesting. Right now, we're in kind of another startup boom. But you have to go in knowing what you're getting yourself into. So corporate cats are usually experts in one area, right? Spend years climbing the ladder, right? Their expertise, building expertise. They have kind of a stable lifestyle and real responsibilities, house, family, kids, etc., and kind of an illusion of life balance, right? Well, startup people are usually quite different. First of all, they're generalists. They're good at a lot of different things, and you have to be when there's no infrastructure, there's nothing in place, you're starting from scratch, you're starting something new, you're going to do a lot of different things as a startup person. You usually get an early start. So I started at 13 as an intern at Paragraph, which is a Russian company that moved to Silicon Valley. Got an early exposure to it. By 15, I was a full-time professional designer. By 18, I was running a front-end team in a .com with 20 people in my department. So that's not typical, but usually you'll see a lot of successful founders, entrepreneurs. Most of the time, they at least get started in college or before college, somewhere around there. The reason for that is that they don't get used to this lifestyle. And it's really difficult to make that switch from corporate to startup at some point. So lifestyle is cheap, obviously. Never got spoiled. Nothing to lose, right? And the only thing that matters is a startup. So Alex was talking about yesterday, Alex Hunter was talking about doing kind of this part-time startup thing. Well, I slightly disagree. If you hedge and you kind of do multiple things and don't really put yourself fully into a startup and you're working on something that's worth doing, that's difficult, that's an interesting market, it's likely you're not going to be the one that succeeds because your competition is not sleeping, right? They are working day in, day out, all day, every day. And if you're just doing it part-time, odds are they're going to be the ones that win. So think about that all the way. So as you get into startups, you need a little bit of knowledge, what you're getting yourself into. So this is a little English grammar lesson, right? Know your shit or know your shit. Everybody catch the grammar lesson here? Yes, good. All right. Just checking if you're still alive. All right, so what is a startup? All right, here come the cats. A startup is an experiment in search of a business model. A startup is not a little version of a big company. A startup really isn't a company yet, right? It has to go through several different steps. So a scalable startup is an experiment. If that experiment works out, you start building systems around it, right? You found a business model, you found who your customers are, you have a product market fit, you figured out how to sell, right? That's when you get into this transition period and you start building processes around this business. Before that, you don't really know what to do, what to build, what you need, right? Then you reach break even, you become maybe profitable, you start growing very quickly, and this is when you hire management, senior management. This is where you hire the MBAs. because this is where they can create a very fine-tuned process. This is where you bring in the experts and the specialists in really narrow areas, because now you kind of know which ones you need. Before that, you're really confused. You have more questions than answers, right? So Dave McClure likes to say, startup is confused about what its product is, who its customers are, and how to make money. If you've answered these questions, you are no longer a startup. You are a company, or at least a company transitioning to become a company. And I like to think of it as that if you don't do anything, obviously your default state is failure. Nothing's going to happen. So your job is to unfail your startup, right? To find a way to find some growth, to find something, make it work. So why would you want to start a company? Like, you ask yourself this question, right? So how many of you have started startups here? Okay, how many, keep your hand up. How many are planning to start a startup? Okay, so the ones with your hands not up, what are you doing here? Right? So why would you want to do it? What's your motivation? Right? Here's a normal career, right? At least in Western countries. You get good grades, you get into a good college, you go to start working at a good company, whatever your mother thinks is a good company. You get regular promotions, you retire, you play golf, and you die. You play golf in the US, you play something else here, right? Anywhere. So that's a normal career path, right? Kind of boring, but predictable, and it works. Well, a career path in startup, everybody reads TechCrunch, and they read all these success stories, overnight success stories, and they think, oh, they founded a company and they became billionaires overnight. Well, in reality, if they're successful, it really looks much more like this, right? That's a career path. It's demotivating, demoralizing. It's very difficult, and the success rate is very, very low, right? So you have to be crazy to want to be an entrepreneur, right? Why would you go into something that has such small chance of success and so punishing the whole time, right? It's not fun. The parties are fun, but getting from failure to success is not that easy. It's very, very difficult. Well, your motivation should be something about changing the world. It takes a little bit of crazy to change the world. Do you like the Steve Jobs cat? So why are you doing it? Again, right, I'm asking you this question. Why would you want to put yourself through this? What's motivating you? Is it for the money? Is it for the IPO money? Do you think you're going to take your company public? You're going to become a billionaire? Well, let's take a look at the numbers. In the US, right now, there are about 3,500 seed-funded companies per year in Silicon Valley. 3,500. This year, which is a kind of a big bounce up, there will be less than 50, fewer than 50 tech IPOs. Right? So your chances are pretty low. And most of those are from Silicon Valley. Right? So what are the chances of a Polish company going public and being a $100 million+ company? Can you name one that has done that? Right? So IPO chances are pretty low if you're looking at numbers. I mean, you can believe that you're the next one and you're going to be the first one that does it. That's great. It's a good motivator. But reality is such. So let's take a look at the success rate of funded startups. These are startups that have raised outside money. So 30% just fail outright. They return zero capital. From whatever money, they just go to zero. They pack up their stuff, pack up their toys, and go home. I'll go to the next one. 30% are unprofitable. They might return half the money, a third of the money that was invested, 20% of the money, etc. Another 30%, somewhat profitable. They'll return more capital than was invested. But it might take years, and as an investment, it's not a good one. Right? If you're given the choice of knowing exactly what it's going to be in 5 to 8 years, this company coming out, you could have easily just bought random stocks and made more money as an investor. And maybe 10% are big successes. Right? That means that they're returning a good amount of capital. Right? Venture capital wants to return at least 6x for the model to work. Hopefully 10x or more to make up for the losers. So failure is over-glorified in startups, right? Failing is good, failing is great. Well, the only thing failure is good for is to teach you lessons that you can't learn in any other way. There are some things that you can learn only by doing them, only by Well, hopefully succeeding, right? But most times you will fail, and you have to learn from it. But it's not something you should be out there seeking. I want to go out there and fail. Shouldn't put a smile on your face, because success teaches you more, right? So the odds of success are much higher second time around if you've succeeded before, right? So first-time founder chances of success are about 18%. Less than 1 in 5, fewer than 1 in 5, will actually succeed, whatever the definition will be for you with this business, first time around. If you failed before, congratulations. If you're a repeat failed founder, your chances go up by 2% of success on the next one. But success is the best teacher. If you succeeded before, your chances of succeeding again are much higher, right? So you definitely should not be so flippant about, oh, we failed, it's okay. Yeah, well, I mean, it's reality. If you're doing something difficult, most times you will fail. If it's too easy, it's not interesting, it's not worth doing, right? But you should really go for success. Given the choice, if somebody said, would you like to fail or succeed, what are you going to choose? In this market especially, and actually most markets, if you're good today in this current wave of startups, you will get acquired. That's a realistic goal. That's a realistic reality for you right now, right? So are you doing it for the freedom? You want to be free. You don't like to have a boss, right? You have a problem with authority. I know I had a problem with authority. Well, in a typical startup or a typical job, you have one boss, right? I love this picture. Well, guess what? In a startup, every user is your boss. If you're in B2B, you're going to get so many feature requests, you're not going to know what to do with yourself, right? You're going to do backflips for every customer, especially early on, right? Do you have a family, or you plan to have one soon? Well, they will suffer, guaranteed. I love this quote from Ben Horowitz. As a startup CEO, I slept like a baby. I woke up every 2 hours and cried. So, have I talked you out of doing startups yet? Does everybody give up? Cash in your cards, go, leave? No? Okay, well, good. Because morale is very important, and making sure that you see the big picture when your startup is very important. You're going to have more bad days than good days, especially early on. And it's very important to always look back, not what was yesterday and what's today, but where were you 3 months ago? Where were you 6 months ago? Where were you a year ago? Are you making progress? That should keep you motivated, right? In a startup, again, you're going to have a lot of bad days, but the big picture is what you should be focused on. And good news, you can improve your chances of success. So let's talk about that a little bit. First of all, when you're choosing what to work on, right? A lot of people kind of fall in love with the idea of startups. I always say your first startup, if you're really choosing that career path, should not be your own. You should go work for a fast-growing startup for a year, 2 or 3. You will learn more in that company in that year, 2 or 3, than any top business school in the world. You will learn more in that fast-growing startup in a year than you will at Stanford, Harvard, Oxford, you name it. And you should definitely do that. You will definitely learn more there from people that know what they're doing, from a fast-growing startup that kind of won the lottery, so to say, than you will of 10 years of your own hard lessons, right? But how do you choose a problem to work on when you feel ready to do your own thing? Well, it should be something that just won't leave you alone. It should be a problem that you can't live without solving. It's not something you say, well, I'm just going to start working and coding and then figure it out. No. You should look for a problem in your business that you know, in the industry that you know, or in your personal life, whatever it is, that just won't leave you alone. And you're thinking about it for months. You're researching it, trying to figure out, is this thing really worth pursuing? You should really take the time to do that. You should really take the time to sell yourself on this problem before you dive in and start building code, raising money, etc. Do not build a technology, or don't build technology looking for a problem to solve, right? So this is a typical engineer trap. I built this thing, and then I'm going to try to turn this into a business. Well, it's a little bit backwards. It's a lot easier to identify a problem and then build the right technology to solve that problem than the other way around, right? This is a big engineering trap, and in Central Eastern Europe, a lot of engineering talent, very little sales and marketing experience, very little market-based company building experience. It's, I built this thing, and I'm going to turn this into a startup because there's a lot of people out there just like me that need this solved. Well, most of the time, these guys and girls are fooling themselves. They built a product for a market of one. So, very important, problem first, technology second. So what is all this lean bullshit? You guys heard all this lean bullshit, lean this, lean that, pivot, schmivit. Well, lean, all it really means is making quick iterations. Why is it important? Because you have a very short amount of time, right? Time to get to market, time to compete, and the money that you raise just gives you a little bit more time, right? So because what you're trying to solve is so difficult and so unknown, or should be, quick iterations gives you a chance to solve that. You have 20 chances at the problem, 100 chances at the problem instead of just one. If you're sitting there in stealth and building the solution for a year, and then you're coming out of stealth and just to realize that nobody needs this or it's a completely wrong solution, and you ran out of money, you're screwed. So you need to get this product out to customers faster and get that feedback much faster, right? Do yourself a favor, because you're not going to be right the first time or the first 10 times. You're going to need to make changes. So don't wait till you think the product is perfect, right? It's never going to be. You get more chances to solve the problem, more chances to catch that prey. Big cats. We're moving on to big cats now. So what's a good startup, right? What does an investor look at and say, well, that's an interesting startup, let me find out more, right? By the way, your first encounter with investors, the investors are thinking, give me a reason to say yes. And once you get past a certain point, and it's interesting, the investors will switch and start looking for reasons to say no, right? So what's that first reason to say yes? Well, traction, up and to the right. Nothing matters more than traction, right? And if you saw the startup pitches yesterday that we were critiquing, when they get to a punchline way later in the presentation, oh, by the way, this thing, yeah, we have 250,000 users and we've made $10 million and we're growing 90% a month. Well, it would be much more interesting if you started with that information, because then I would realize that this is a real company, this is a real product, somebody needs this. I don't really care about the technology, I don't really care about anything until I can understand if somebody needs this. And if you have traction, you always lead with traction, right? And when you're building, especially early on, the only focus, the only target should be getting more people to use it, right? If it's a free product, consumer product, they pay you with their time, they use it and enjoy it and share it with their friends. If it's a B2B product, obviously they subscribe and they use it and they pay you for it, right? These are the only things that you should be looking at. You shouldn't fall in love with your own product and just build product for the sake of product. You're building something for your customers, right? So it's all about traction. It solves a painful problem for a specific customer, right? You should be pitching the problem, right? Who's the customer? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? If you can't answer that question in one sentence, you've got some thinking to do. And you should really start with that. That's a nice cat too, right? Having some fun here. So how can you be sure you're solving a problem, right? You can think that you're solving a problem. It might be a problem in your own head. Well, here's a great hint, is that it's currently being solved in different ways. People are trying to solve this. It might be something that is not being solved in exactly the same way as you are solving it. Hopefully it's not, right? But people are trying to solve this problem. And you can look at different technology paradigms that come about. They give you new chances, more convenient, cheaper, faster, better ways to solve the same old problems, right? So personal computers came along, and all of a sudden you can do accounting on a computer instead of paper. That was a pretty easy pitch, right? Then you had the web, and you had a new paradigm where now you can do web-connected things that open up a whole new world of opportunities. Then you had the mobile world, right? And before it was, well, the pitch is you can do it on a computer. Well, now you can do it anywhere from your pocket. Anywhere, anytime, you're connected. And the next paradigm is arguably wearable computing. So that will open up a whole new paradigm of solutions. Right? So you can always think of, what am I competing with? In a lot of cases in business, you're competing with email, for example, or not doing anything, right? If the customer's alternative is, well, I don't really have to do this, then it's probably not a problem. And a huge mistake that founders make is they go on stage and proudly say, we have no competitors. Well, congratulations, there's probably no problem to solve, and there's no market. You don't have a business. So don't make this mistake. This is a rookie mistake. Anybody goes out to pitch their startup and says, we have no competitors. Well, I just stopped listening. It's a very lonely place. So my recommendation to you, especially if you're an engineer, stop coding, get out of the building, go talk to your customers as soon as possible, face your fears, and validate your assumptions. You think you're the smartest, you think that you're a unique snowflake, you think you know better, but guess what? You're going to learn from your customers very, very quickly that you're wrong, or that you didn't think of a million different things, or maybe they don't realize that this is the right solution, maybe they have something else in mind. The only way you'll find out is by talking to your customers as soon as possible. So how is your solution different and better? Right? That's another thing. Come out on stage and say, well, we're different. Okay, well, different for the sake of being different is not that interesting. You have to be different and better, and not in an incremental way. Right? If you're going to unseat a strong competitor, you have to be twice as good at half the price. That's what it takes. And if you're talking about old technology, you have an opportunity to do that. Right? If there's a big company working on this problem and you're trying to disrupt the market, that means that they've built their business around an old way of solving this problem. And it's going to be very difficult for them to turn their ship and do it the way you're doing it, hopefully, right? If you see that, you're onto something. Right? You're not going to beat them at their own business. You're not going to out-advertise a company that has 100 times, a million times more money than you, and already has staff, and already has partnerships, and already has a brand, etc. You have to do it in a different way. You have to flank them, right? Military strategy. And it has to be a big market. Why a big market? Why is it important to be a big market? Well, if you're building a venture scale business where the investors are really looking for where they can get 100 times their money back, it's important that it's a big market because your chances of success are very low, right? Chances of success are very low, so the reward should be very high if you do succeed. Nobody will play a lottery for $100. Play a lottery for $100 million. That's motivation. And chances are you'll get a small part of this market, right? The other thing that really helps is if the market is growing very quickly. Why is that important? Well, first of all, new companies have an opportunity to build a business very easily. They'll come in, become one of the leaders, and maybe the whole market is growing at 20% a year. Guess what? It'll be very easy for you to grow 20% a year with the market. But if you're going into a giant market that's very stagnant or maybe shrinking a little bit, it's going to be that much more difficult for you to fight it out and take customers away from big competitors, from big established companies. So if you can help it, go for markets that are large and are growing fast for this reason, because you will grow with them. It's a lot easier to build a business in a growing market than a big, stable market. Now, at the end of the day, you're building a business. So you have to think of a business model from day one. Maybe you're not monetizing right away, but you have to really think about this. This is not a hobby. This is a business. And your investors are going to want to see at least ideas of how you think you'll make money very, very quickly, right? Right from the beginning. So there are two types of business models. There are symmetric business models, where the customer pays for the solution, typical B2B, subscription, etc. You subscribe, I solve your problem, you pay me $20 a month, everybody's happy. And there are asymmetric business models. This is where somebody else pays for the experience, right? So Facebook is not a product, you are the product on Facebook, right? Because Facebook sells advertising around that. And today, 10 million users is something that, kind of 10 million is the new 1 million. So you need to have very large amount of consumers that are spending a decent amount of time on your platform to have an asymmetric business model. So if you're shooting for something like that that's advertising supported, for example, you need to have a very large audience and you need to be growing very quickly. Right? That's another thing that you need to keep in mind. It can't be something that's for a small group and it's going to be advertising supported. It's just not going to work as a business. You need to think about that. So scale. Key word here is scale. And what does that really mean? How do you measure scale? Well, I like to look at it as revenue per employee. So on the one hand, you have, let's say, McDonald's. It has $64,000 per employee and about 1.7 million employees. If you were to walk into a VC today with a business plan to build McDonald's, probably wouldn't get funded. It takes a little bit of capital to get there. Whereas Craigslist, the other extreme example, $3.6 million per employee, but 23 employees. Right? Craigslist could have been a little bigger. So what you want to shoot for is somewhere in the middle. Right? So Apple does a little over 2 million per employee, which is amazing for a company that size. Right? Well, most valuable company in the world. They're doing okay. Amazon does about 700,000 per employee. So a good target is about $1 million per employee per year when you're at full scale. This is also a great test when you go in to pitch an investor and you have your presentation and a hockey stick slide where you're presenting the fastest growing startup in the history of startups and how you're going to be it and how you're going to do 100 million per employee in year 2. So you need to kind of check yourself a little bit and be sure that you're realistic with your expectations. Do a little bit of research about how companies grow, how fast, what is a good company, what's good growth, and try to align your model for that. Because investors know these numbers. And this is a good test to see if you're crazy or you know what you're talking about or not. It's better to be more conservative than to be crazy. And don't forget you're building a repeatable business. So what does that mean? You need to measure everything. Right? In today's world of internet distribution, you need to measure everything because that's how you're going to tune your business. This is your cockpit, you're the pilot, and you have different knobs and levers to pull, but you need to know what you're measuring. This is customer acquisition, this is customer adoption, this is sales, etc. All the different numbers, you need to measure them out, build your funnel. And there are lots of tools for that. Now, early on, your main ingredient in your startup, sometimes your only ingredient is your team. Right? So if you're a seed stage and you have no traction, well, if you have traction, that solves everything. Because that's a signal that says, whatever you're doing, it's working. Right? That's why, again, traction is so important. But otherwise, we're going to look and say, okay, maybe you identified an interesting problem, an interesting market. Why are you going to be the ones that solve this problem? Why is it not going to be somebody else? The average other smart person or somebody that has more experience with the industry, right? And hiring is very hard, especially when you're a startup. You don't have much money. You don't have any stability. You don't have any support structure. You don't have a long-term plan, right? When you're competing against a big company. So how do you get people from big companies to give up a big chunk of their salary or come work for you for free for a few months until you raise money? How do you do that? Right? Well, one thing you have is stock. And in Central Eastern Europe, this is not as strong as, let's say, in Silicon Valley yet, because nobody here knows a secretary that became a millionaire from an IPO. But when Facebook went public, the first 1,000 employees became millionaires off the stock. Right? So it's a little bit of a trade-off. And not only is everybody getting a piece of the success, but they have a sense of ownership. They're working on, it's their startup too. They're not just employees. It's a very important effect that hasn't reached Central Eastern Europe and much beyond Western Europe yet. But it's a very important effect. You offer flexibility. You can work any 16 hours in a day. Right? Sometimes more. But really the most important thing is you give somebody a chance to make a difference. And that's really what should motivate you when you start the startup. And this is something that you need to infect your employees with as well. It's that passion. Right? If you can convince them, it's a vision. If you can't, it's a hallucination. Remember that. If you can't convince anybody, and you think why is everybody so stupid? Why don't they understand? This is the next big thing. Well, you either need to get better at convincing people, or maybe you're the crazy one. Maybe you're a little too crazy. So what is a good startup team, a balanced startup team today? Well, first and foremost, again, I'm going to say this, domain expertise. Why are you going to be the one that solved this particular problem? Why do you know it better than the average smart person? Why do you know it better than somebody who's been in the industry forever? You need to be an insider, right? You can't just observe the problem from the outside. Engineering, you obviously need to be able to build a solution, right? If you're in a software hardware business, your core competency is to build software hardware. You can't be a couple of MBAs and say, well, we'll just hire somebody else to build it. We'll give them some equity, or we'll give them all the seed money we just raised. Two problems with that, right? If you pay them all the money you just raised to build a prototype, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do when you need to iterate on that? What are you going to do when you need to advertise and bring traffic in when you give away all your cash? Or if you give out equity, you'll say, okay, let's say you give them 5% to build a prototype, right? Early on, your company is worth nothing. You give them 5%, let's say they agree to do overall stock. Well, what are you going to do in the next 20 iterations and changes to the product? You're going to give away 100% of your company? So it doesn't work. At a certain point, very early on, you need to in-source engineering and be able to build and iterate on the product. And the third corner of the pyramid is design. And I'm biased, I'm a designer, but today, especially in mobile world, you have 15 seconds to convince the person that you just spent maybe money getting to download your app to open it for the second time. Do you think they care about what platform you built it on? If you're Ruby on Rails or Java or Scala or PHP or .NET, no. They don't care, they don't know. 99% of the world does not understand the magic of programming. All they understand is the experience. The experience is the product. So design is the minimum ticket of admission. If you want to compete, you need to have good design. Even in B2B world, in enterprise world, which before was really kind of ugly, unusable applications, now, more than ever, people are getting spoiled and they're going for good experiences, right? So understand your business, be able to build product, be able to design an interface that's a pleasure to use. What is your unfair advantage? You should always be able to communicate what your unfair advantage is. Why are you going to win? Why isn't somebody else going to win that same market? If you don't have any competition, we already talked about that. Then you probably don't have a business to go after. What are your accomplishments? You need to kind of put points on the board. It's an American expression, basketball expression. You raise money. Who did you raise money from? Is it from professional investors that know what they're talking about, that believe in you, that will support you? Or is it from friends, family, and fools only, and you can't raise professional money? That's a signal in itself. Partnerships. It's important to understand what you'll get out of the partnerships. You certainly shouldn't think that you're going to create a partnership with a big company and they're just going to sell your product and you don't have to worry about sales. That's a big rookie mistake. That'll never happen. Partners will never sell more than 5% of your sales. They will never sell it like their own product. But partnerships are a very important signal because that means that some big company in your industry has validated that what you're doing is interesting and valuable and solves a problem. That's an important signal to outsiders. It's an important signal to investors. And at the end of the day, you need to go for growth. Growth solves all problems. Sales solves all problems. Unless you have crazy management doing bad things. So let's take a look at how you'll go through the funding of your startup. Right? In the US, right now in Silicon Valley, this is kind of the perfect ladder of funding. At the first stage, it'll be bootstrapping or raising money from friends, family, and fools. These are people that know you, that believe in you. They don't care about what you're working on. They want to help you. Right? This is friends, family, and fools. Next, you'll probably see accelerators. That's a valid option. Accelerators take something that already has some groundwork and they accelerate it. Hence the name. So you have to have something, some kind of prototype, something that shows that it works, shows some kind of basic product market fit. And then you'll get the help and mentorship. And by the way, as accelerators are looking at you as a good project, you should also be looking at them and interviewing them. And accelerators measured by the type of help that you get. You get very little money from accelerators. But what you do get is expertise and mentorship. So you should really look at who the mentors are and if that's going to really be helpful for you. And if they're successful people, if they're experts in their area. If you can get this special access. Because you're going to give away a chunk of your company, you have to understand what for, and what are you going to spend that 3 months on, right? When you graduate out of the accelerator, if it's a top-tier program, about 60% of the time you'll raise your next round of funding. It'll usually come from angels or seed VCs. Seed stage VCs, these are smaller funds that write smaller checks, much like we're doing with CCC in Europe, or will be next year. If you graduate out of that, 1 out of 100 will raise money from bigger funds that are 100 million plus, that will write you $1 million+ check. Write you $1 million to $3 to $5 million. But today, for that to happen, you have to have a certain amount of traction. You have to show that this thing is really working. It's time to scale. It's time to put it into that transition period. Then there's growth equity, but that's something that you really don't need to worry about right now. This is Google Ventures or Google Capital putting in $250 million into Uber, for example. And if you're lucky and you're good, you'll either sell the company or go public. Right? That's the goal. Well, let's take a look at Europe. That's not even a cat. That's a gremlin. Right? So in Europe, it looks a little different right now. Right? There's very little personal savings compared to the US, so bootstrapping is very difficult. Yes, it's a lot cheaper to live. It's a lot cheaper to start things, but still, it's a little bit more difficult. There are 1 million accelerators in Europe. I think over 200 officially, of various qualities. There may be 10 that are worth it. The rest don't add value. Right? It's very interesting to do accelerators right now. There are very few angels and seed VCs. You come out of the accelerator, and even if you're a good company, very difficult to raise that next round of money. Right? Something that will hopefully get fixed. There's a decent amount of 100 million plus funds, so if you do have good success, for you to raise a few million euros, not a problem. Growth equity, etc., the old banks, and then the acquisitions and IPOs, well, for Europe, unfortunately, they leave to the US. That's very unfortunate for Europe because Europe doesn't capture that value. So sooner or later, these companies, the good ones, will leave to the US, most of them. And hopefully that gets fixed in the next few years in Europe. So in 2001, something happened, a dot-com crash. And as far as the startup world in Europe, here's what happened. US funds ran away back home. They had enough problems as it is. And most European VCs kind of died. There were literally about 6 or 7 funds that survived the dot-com crash in 2001 in Europe. It's just now really starting to pick up. Right? Up to like 2004, 2005, it was very, very, very quiet here. Right? So US has a little bit of an advantage on this wave as well, as far as timing goes, by a couple of years. But the reality is, and there should be no excuses, it is much easier to start a startup anywhere in the world now than it was in 1999 in Silicon Valley. Why is that? Well, the world has changed. Right? We have distribution platforms. Right? We have the mobile world. That's changed everything. We're much more connected. You have new tools of the trade. You did not have Google Play. You didn't have the App Store. You didn't have Amazon Web Services. You didn't have payments that you can just turn on. You didn't have advertising that's readily available that gives you access to hundreds of millions of people. None of these things existed in the first wave. PayPal just barely, but not in the same form as you know it now. It took $5 million just to buy hardware, rack it up, just to be able to start being online and start writing software. You don't need any of that now. So there should be no excuses. You can start from anywhere in the world. You can buy those same ads from anywhere in the world. You can get that traffic. You can get those users. You can get those downloads from anywhere in the world. No excuses. And the internet is a series of tubes full of cats. I have no point for this slide. It's just a good slide. No, but the point you get, right? You have distribution. You can use internet-driven distribution models to drive traffic anywhere in the world. You don't have to be in Silicon Valley, right? So Kylie Ng from 500 Startups, he's a Malaysian entrepreneur. He has this great talk that he does in Southeast Asia, and he tries to break what he calls the shithole state of mind. You should really look it up. It's great. Europe has the same shithole state of mind. Well, why we can't compete with US? We can't compete with London. Oh, we're just going to work on these tiny little problems. Well, guess what? There are great things coming out of Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, and beyond. And you have all the tools that you need to get there, and a lot of advantages. So venture capital is changing to adjust to this world, right? Where it's a lot cheaper to start a startup, right? And majority of exits, you know, you read on TechCrunch these billion-dollar acquisitions, these IPOs, all of this. But reality is, most companies will sell between $10 and $80 million. Even Y Combinator, and everybody, I hope everybody here knows Y Combinator, right? Everybody knows Y Combinator? #1 accelerator in the world, right? So their median exit is $20 million. Yes, out of the 700 plus companies they've funded, they've produced some unicorns. Dropbox, Airbnb, Stripe, etc. These are billion-dollar companies, multi-billion-dollar companies. But their median exit is about 20 million. So that's a realistic goal, you know, to shoot for that. You want to obviously go after much bigger markets, but reality is that you have a real chance, and it's a life-changing event for anybody, you know, in this part of the world, especially, to exit out of your business after a few years for $20 million. That will change your life. That will change the life of your kids, your whole family, and a lot of your friends. Depends on how generous you are. It's a realistic goal. It's a very interesting goal, and it's something you should pursue. So why here and why now? Why in Europe? Why in Poland? Why here? Why meow? Okay. So the interesting thing for VCs, for investors, is that Europe actually produces higher venture exits than the US. It is cheaper to create startups in Europe, at least for now. Right? There's much less competition for engineering talent. The starting salary of a good software engineer in Silicon Valley is about $120,000. Starting salary straight out of college. So if you're a software engineer and you don't have a good startup that you're working on right now, my recommendation is pack your bags. No. The point is that it's very difficult, and the #1 resource that's missing in Silicon Valley, that's creating all of this inflation, companies have to raise more money and pay more for employees, and these employees compete for the same apartments. And most people don't realize that San Francisco is a city of about 850,000 people. It's a small city as cities go, right? In Europe, that problem doesn't really exist, not at the same level. So European exits are 25% smaller, right, for the same quality company, same revenue, same factors, etc. But the entry valuations are 3 to 4 times cheaper. So an investor that knows what to look for, they will invest in a company in Europe, you know, at about $1 million valuation. That same company will be worth about 5 in Silicon Valley. So that's very attractive for greedy investors. And a greedy investor is a good investor usually, in a good way. So Europe produces half as many exits as the US, about 1/3 of these home run $100 million plus exits already, but only in 20% of the capital. Those are great numbers, right? And if you look at the cash-on-cash exits, that's the other way investors measure their success. In the US, this big exit, on average, will give you 4.5 times your money, which is actually below what investors promise to their investors when they try to raise the fund. They promise about 6x, 20% IRR. All right, over 10 years, that's 6x. In Europe, that same exit, on average, is about 7.2x, right? Yes. Cats. And just in 2014 alone, there's been 35% more, or more than 35% more money invested in 1 year in Europe. So money is coming, right? You can feel it, you can see it if you're paying attention. That's really good news for the entrepreneurs in the room. You will have the fuel that you need. So brace yourselves, investors are coming. Does everybody get the reference? This one a little too deep, a little too meta. So the future is bright for European startups, and I'll leave you with a few words of advice and suggestions. So looking forward, here's what you should be looking for. First of all, win your home market first. Do not try to run away to Silicon Valley right away. Odds are that it's going to be very difficult. Even if you raise a little bit of money and you move to Silicon Valley, well, guess what? You're going to have zero connections. You're going to have zero personal support network. Your family's not going to be there to pat you on the head when you had a tough day. And you're competing with the best of the best. But guess what? There are lots of regional problems to solve. There are lots of regional, localized versions of different solutions that need to come to Europe. And who is best qualified to do that? Probably not the US companies. Probably you, here, knowing the problems inside and out. So you should, in most cases, win your home market first before you try to go global. Even if it's a small market, use it as a laboratory. Look at Israel. Look at Croatia. There's some great stuff coming out of Croatia. Tiny little country, and they're using that market as a laboratory because nobody else is coming to that market to compete with them. If you win there, you can then start moving it out to larger parts of Europe and then maybe globally. Second, as soon as you get some success, as soon as you get some unique knowledge, you need to start sharing it with other people in the ecosystem. This is one of the key ways that Silicon Valley became what it is. 6 or 7 generations of tech entrepreneurs helping the next generation. Not consultants per se, but people that are happy to help and coach and impart their knowledge on the next generation. Eastern European, Central European society is a little bit more closed. People are less willing to help, but this needs to change. This is going to be one of the biggest things. The money will come, but this knowledge that needs to be shared, that needs to be there. And people that understand the culture and have had some global success need to come back, and they need to mentor the next generation, right? So I try to do that. You know, I understand Ukrainian culture, Russian, Soviet, whatever you want to call it. So I was born in Ukraine, but from 8 years old grew up in Silicon Valley, but I still am 1.5 generation. So I try to come back and understanding the culture, I can explain certain things in a more accessible way than somebody else can. I understand these people. And Polacks that are successful on the world stage should come back and do the same thing and help the next generation of Polish entrepreneurs. And lastly, help build the ecosystem. Pay attention to what's going on. I'll post these slides, you can grab the link, but Startup Weekend did a great report on what it takes to build an ecosystem. It's a combination of talent, and that's certainly here, density, big enough population, that's interesting, right? Certain culture that everybody feels so you can build for that culture, capital, obviously, and then regulation. So government needs to create the economic conditions for entrepreneurship to thrive, Keynesian economics, for the economists in the room, and get out of the way. Right? So in Europe, that's actually been a little bit of a problem. Government gets a little too involved and tries to help a little too much, but doesn't know how to do it. Just throw a bunch of money at this, and it usually doesn't work. But if you look at how Silicon Valley was created, US government during the Soviet times was the first real customer for Silicon Valley. Before it was Silicon Valley, it was Microwave Valley. There's a lot of signals intelligence companies that came out of Stanford research that the government, the Department of Defense, was a customer for. Next, what they did was started doing matching. So instead of investing money directly, they started doing co-investing with smart investors. For every $1 investors will put in, the government would do $2 grant. That was huge motivation for investors to start investing in Silicon Valley. These were investors from the East Coast that came to California and started looking at technology instead of public companies. Next, they did change a couple of things that affected the way profits are taxed from these type of ventures. And that kind of created the whole venture capital industry. That's really the government's role in this, is to create the infrastructure, the economic infrastructure for business to thrive. So if you want the slides, please follow me on Twitter. Can we get some volume? If you have a few minutes for questions, just yell them out. Some volume? No? Doesn't really work without the volume. There we go. So just yell out your questions. All right. If there are no questions, well, we'll watch a little bit of this. This is great. Have you guys seen the yelling goats? This one's good. See how long we can keep this going. All right, so I'll leave you with this. It's a little present from me to you. I'm working on a book which will basically, from my perspective, give you what you would get in an accelerator program from start to finish. First-time entrepreneur, step by step. It'll come out hopefully by the end of next year. These things take a while, but you can download the first chapter, and I hope you enjoy it and give me some feedback on if you like it. This is my way of validating the market for this. So with that, thank you very much, and hope to talk to you soon.